Unit 4 Iteration, Topic 4.5 Informal Code Analysis. In this lesson, you will practice tracing through code with loops and analyzing loops to determine how many times they run. Practice makes permanent and builds confidence. Get used to constructing trace tables to verify your code. We're going to complete 3 exercises that practice tracing code to predict outcomes. Construct a trace table to predict what the code will do when you run it. Notice that the 0 in number of loops represents the state of the variables before entering the loop for the first time. At this time, var1 stores the value 3 and var2 stores the value 2. As both expressions evaluate to true, we enter the loop updating the values of var1 and var2. At the end of this program, var1 will store the value 5 and var2 will store the value 0. What are the values of var1 and var2 when this code finishes executing? At the start of the program, var1 stores the value 0 and var2 stores the value 2. As long as the Boolean expressions evaluate to true, we will continue looping and updating the variables accordingly. What are the values of var1 and var2 when the Boolean expressions evaluate to false and the loop is exited? Well, var1 stores the value 2 and var2 stores the value 0. The trace table allowed us to verify answer B. What are the values of x and y when the code finishes executing? At the start of the program, prior to entering the loop, x and y store the values 2 and 5 respectively. As long as both conditions evaluate to true, we will continue running the while loop. When the compound Boolean expression evaluates to false, we exit the loop. At this time, x stores the value 4 and y stores the value 3. A statement execution count indicates the number of times a statement is executed by the program. We will complete exercises to practice analyzing how many times a loop will run. In this problem, how many stars are printed out in the loop? How many times does the loop run? Figure it out on paper before you run the code. In this case, the loop will run 4 times and outputs 4 stars. Do you notice a pattern or possible formula in regards to the boundaries of the loop and the number of loops? The formula for calculating how many times a loop is run is by taking the largest possible value, subtracting the smallest value from it, and adding 1. In the code above, the largest value that allows the loop to run is 6, which is the largest value less than 7. The smallest value that allows a loop to execute is 3, so this loop executes 6 minus 3 plus 1, which will equal 4 times. In this nested loop exercise, how many stars are printed out by the following loops? How many times do the loops run? Calculate on paper. Using the formula for each loop, let's calculate. Using this formula, the outer loop will loop 5 times. Applying the same formula to the inner loop, it will loop 10 times. So the total number of loops would be 5 times 10, which gives us 50. The number of times a nested for loop body is executed is the number of times the outer loop runs multiplied by the number of times the inner loop runs. In other words, outer loop times inner loop. Practice makes permanent and builds confidence. How many times does the following code print a star? Using the formula, the outer loop will run 5 times. The inner loop will run 4 times. 5 times 4 is 20. What does the following code print? Using the formula, the outer loop will run 6 times and the inner loop will run 5 times. Remember that the outer loop represents the number of rows and the inner loop represents the number of elements in each row. What does the following print? Applying the formula, the outer loop will run 7 times and the inner loop will run 6 times. So there will be 7 rows and 6 stars or values per row. Consider the following code segment. How many times is the string hi printed as a result of executing the code segment? We can apply the same formula with the while loop. The while loop will run 5 times, and the inner for loop will run 3 times. 5 times 3 is 15.